Good morning. I'm Mark Allen with Gaper, and I'm here today with Matt White, the CEO of WhiteThorn Games. Good afternoon in your case, Matt. How you doing?
Hey there, great. Happy to be here.
And so can you start with by sharing a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
Yeah. I got into games right out of college. I did a PhD in Memorial, which is in Newfoundland and Northeast Canada. But all I've ever worked in is in the games usability and analytics space. So I studied cognitive science education, which is sort of like human-computer interaction. Before that was a degree.
Hmm.
And basically you studied user error and how users learned to interact with technology. So companies like GE Health or banks, anytime you have to interact with some kind of screen or some kind of piece of tech, there's a usability and user experience person on the back end making certain you don't make errors that lead to flukes, failures, costs, time wasted, that kind of thing. So that was my sort of education, and this was becoming a field in games around that same time as well, when we started to critically think about how players are more than just there for kind of like a frivolous experience. It's as games got larger and more complicated, bigger companies started picking up folks like me to do that kind of work. So I spent some time at some startups in Atlantic, Canada. Started a few of my own that didn't do so well,
Hmm.
and then eventually took a teaching position at Penn State for a while. Contracted with some other AAA entities. Ended up at Volition, which is a game studio in Champaign, south of Chicago. Did a stint at PlayStation in California, and moved back here to Erie, PA, where my wife's family is from, to start my own entity. We've been about 3.5 years now, and doing pretty well. We were bootstrapped for a while, just did a seed round that closed in the spring, about a million and a half. Nothing massive, but for Pennsylvania, that'll last me years. So it's, yeah.
Very true. And those discs behind you on the wall, are those games you've worked on?
Yeah, a few of them. Yeah. These are some of the AAA titles. I was on the MLB The Show series, which is a
Ah,
sort of Major League Baseball series from PlayStation. Few of the VR titles when the VR headset first launched, and Volition before that. They do a series called Saints Row. It's a sort of open world action
ah,
shooter type thing.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what has been your experience with remote employment, both as an employee and an employer?
Yeah, when I first left PlayStation to come back here, we were starting our own thing, but entirely bootstrapped. We're a games publisher, so we're basically a bit like a record label. We don't do a lot of development on our own. Most of what we do is represent developers and sell their products, do things like certification, taxes, marketing, getting them onto consoles, giving them back sales numbers, bringing them to trade shows, that kind of thing. So we act like an agent or a traditional book publisher, a film house, things like that. And as a result, we take a small cut of their eventual revenue, and the lion's share of it goes back to the developer. Excuse me.
Hmm.
In any case, when I first left, we were bootstrapping this business, and that bootstrap was largely funded by much of the down payment we were saving for a house in California. And so a lot of that went to putting the business together. But bootstrapping only goes so far. So I also needed to make sure that my, wife and son ate. So when I left, I also took a job with Keyword Studios, which is another major games industry service provider, via one of their companies, Player Research, which is again a usability and analytics company, and that was an entirely remote job. That company's headquartered in Ireland,
Hmm.
so definitely not. They have a U.S. office in Seattle, but again, I was in Erie, PA, and that Seattle office is quite small. Um, in any case, that on the employee side, I mean, that allowed me tremendous flexibility. Much of what I do or did in that portion of my employment was largely like analytics reports. So things like projecting behaviors into the future, projecting the number of users that'll be on an app at a given time. It's stuff that just needs to be done. It doesn't need to be done in real time, if that makes sense. So you
Hmm.
receive, a glut of data and say, hey, by next Monday, can you make sure we have these reports available? And that's sort of the kind of remote work it was, not the kind of what you might call synchronous remote work, where we're all together working synchronously on something. So it was quite an asynchronous employment, which meant that so long as I was able to, do those things and make sure everything got done at a high level of quality within a good amount of time, they didn't really much care whether or not I was sitting face to screen 9 to 5 every single day, which was quite beneficial both with new toddler
Mm.
and also, trying to simultaneously run this other thing and get it off the ground. So certainly allowed a tremendous amount of flexibility as an employee. As an employer, I think one of the, we'll probably get into the epidemic COVID nonsense in a bit, but that notwithstanding, we have, prior to the meltdown of the planet, we had 2 remote employees of our 8 are permanently remote. They have more administrative, directorial type roles
Hmm.
and are more directing other people's work. And so they have been really, really, they've adjusted very well to that kind of remote thing, and it's worked out very well for us. There's certain things in games that don't remote well.
Mm.
So for example, BizDev does not remote well, period. I mean,
Mm.
it's so much of it relies on my experience only. Your mileage may vary, but for us, it just doesn't remote well. There's something so for example, one of our revenue lines, we also sell some of the services that we provide to our clients just as a cash basis in order to, so for example, if you need, one of the services we provide is something called porting. What this means is when you make a video game, you make it on a computer, just like the ones we're sitting on right now. But in order to get it onto, say, a Nintendo Switch or an Xbox or whatever, there's a technical process you have to undergo in order to change that code from something that runs on a PC to something that runs on a console. And that's kind of a complex engineering task that only certain groups of people know how to do. And
Mm.
so that's something we provide free of charge to our publishing clients as part of the package we offer them. But we also just sell it for cash. So we don't
Mm.
take, say some company already has a publisher, but they don't have the technical bandwidth in order to do this. We'll just take a cash payment, do it, give them back the finished product. So that's one of our verticals, if you like.
Mm.
Doing sales for that though is really difficult without our in person.
Yeah.
It's hard. Like cold calls feel like cold calls, and that's something we as like salespeople have never gotten over.
Mm.
As an example, when we just finished that round this spring, I probably instantly got like 700 new LinkedIn followers, and all of which are, "Hey Matthew, hi Matthew," like just
Hmm.
and they feel like cold calls, right? Like, and I mean, I'm a sales guy, so I
Right.
know how hard that is, but they always feel like cold calls. They feel annoying. The last thing I want to do is reach out and give people more email to read through. Like that feels like a mean-spirited thing to do to somebody.
Mm.
So our sales have always been, "Hey, we're all at this mixer. We're looking for tech services. We all came here willingly. Now suddenly it doesn't feel like a cold call if I approach somebody, learn something about them, share a drink." It's, so that
Right.
piece has really been
Yeah.
stymied by the lack of ability to be in person. But most of our asset creation, it's a big part of games. So all the stuff you look at when you play a game, all the 3D models and all the art and all the effects, those are just made like by an
Mm.
artist. And those folks, they can sit down and do that at their own PCs quite easily. So
Yeah.
certain parts are quite flexible and others aren't, I guess is the answer. I think
Yeah.
that's probably the same with most businesses.
Probably, yeah, and maybe in different respects. Although, in general, I think software development just lends itself to remote work naturally.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and just out of curiosity, what is the programming language of the gaming industry? I always thought it was C.
Depends. There's quite a few, but we primarily work in like C sharp,
Mm.
which is a C++
Right. Well, it's
sort of
Microsoft's.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yep. So it's sort of C++ like, but
Okay.
yeah, and that's, so it depends. There's several engines, but by and large we use C sharp. We'll do some web work, so that uses a bunch of stuff.
Mm.
For utility things, this like Python, but
Okay.
yeah, almost entirely C sharp.
Mm. Cool. For a sales guy, you seem to know a little bit about technology there.
I have a complicated winding background. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh,
All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. So what do you think is the future of remote employment, and what do you think can be done differently to make it better?
yeah. I mean, I think for better or worse, this year companies learned that when a large swath of their workforce has to go remote, that the world doesn't end.
Hmm.
Um, Certainly there's hiccups, but more and more this year, especially, people are having to come to terms with the fact that remote work's real and it's not going anywhere. And so some of the things we've seen, for example, during this, involuntary shift to remote work that we're all doing right now. We've had really no significant change in quantity of work being done. At the beginning, there were some quality hiccups because many of the people had never worked remotely before. And so this was kind of their first experience with, we only have like, 9 full-time employees and then a couple of contractors. But many of them had never worked a remote job. So there was this sudden, dizzying freedom to be like, well, when do I do this? And so the quality kind of suffered for the first few weeks until they got a little more into the routine.
Yeah.
But really that went away after, because the accountability is still there. I mean, we're in the same Discord, which is like a Slack for video gamers, all day. So, I mean, if you just kind of show up at 3 a.m. and nobody's around to answer you, it's kind of like, well, what are you doing? Like there's that sort of, panopticon kind of accountability because we can all see each other's online status at all times. So it's kind of like, do you ever notice, maybe I think about this a little too philosophically, but do you ever notice how in like most tech companies, they do that open office thing, but they stick the executives around the outside looking in?
Yes.
Like that's 100% just a Foucauldian panopticon. Like, you're being looked at, but you're not being looked at. So it's like, it's a way to make sure you're doing your work without having,
Yes.
Todd, the middle manager, walk around and lean on your cubicle. But it's the same damn thing. And we do the same thing in Slack, like or Discord or whatever you use for your remote solution. I mean, I can see your online status. I can see when you're on your phone versus when you're at your desktop. I can see when you're listening to Spotify, when you're watching Netflix, when you're playing a video game. Like, it's all there. And so it's that same kind of thing. I'm not thrilled with that kind of work employer-employee relationship, but it's definitely part of the culture. Right when the pandemic hit, I said, you guys should buy some Zoom stock like now. And I did, and I made like $4,000. So I was like, yeah, not a ton of money, but enough that I was like, hey, I was right, which is kind of validating, I think. But the reason, and it'll probably dip and correct
Eventually, yes.
But my point with this is, I think suddenly major big Wall Street and Main Street companies are like, wait, we have to embrace this if it was this easy, pandemic wise, for the entire country's economy to just completely fall flat on its face. And all it took was an animal-borne virus and then a series of mismanagement errors for us to be in this situation. And it was that simple. If I'm a forward-thinking COO, I'm probably training people on how to work remotely just in case going forward. And maybe even offering it in lieu of particular other benefits or in addition to, or what, it just seems to me to be that after a year of this, the companies that survive and do well will be at a point where they're like, all right, well, how can we, benefit from that involuntary learning we all just had to do? I think one way or another, this virus has kind of changed the trajectory of this for everybody quite a bit.
No, without a doubt. I mean, remote work was already on an upward trajectory, but it just is. I mean, it skyrocketed in 2 weeks' time.
And speaking of, again, Erie, we've got quite a big co-working space in the middle of the city. I think it's like 120, 130 members. Radius it's called. It's a big space and modern and nice. And I mean, probably a third, 2/3 of the people there are working remotely for a company in DC or Seattle or New York or somewhere where, the idea is, if you can live in Erie, PA and make, I don't know, 80 grand, 90 grand, you are the richest person in Erie, PA. And so the idea, well, maybe not. I mean, there's billionaires.
I know what you meant.
Being a bit facetious. But my point is, if you are making an $80,000, $90,000 salary on the, at a New York City, Manhattan kind of Fifth Avenue company, for the Fifth Avenue company, that's like, man, we're paying this guy nothing. This is great. For the person in Pennsylvania, that's like, I am getting paid twice what I would get paid here. This is great. Like, it works out for both parties that, suddenly this person who's working doing early to mid-career, like accounting software, drives a Tesla and lives in a mansion. And then on the flip side, the firm in New York City is like, hey, we're getting great world-class work, but we're not paying $185,000 plus an insane payroll tax on it. And it's like,
Right.
there's a win-win there for everybody in accessing parts of this country that I think are interesting and diverse and wild and cool and have lots to offer. There was a period in time when the internet wasn't as good as it is now. Like, it was still widely available, but it wasn't like everyone everywhere. Most places in America has some kind of fiber op. And don't get me wrong, there's still a last mile problem here where much of
There
the
is.
country doesn't have it. But we're getting there.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that's really accelerated, I think, is people realizing that, like, oh, that middle part of the country, like, literally, if I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
this happened a lot when I lived in California. I think everyone that I'd spoke to who's like that, wasn't a big traveler, but had been around America were like, yeah, I've been to the other side of the country. I've been to Disney World and I've been to New York City. And
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like there's Disney World, there's New York City, there's California, and then in the middle there's just question marks. And it's
Right.
sort of just like there's 48 other states in here, but I don't know. And it's been an interesting thing now because some of the MIT is in, Massachusetts. They're just not in a New York or a California.
Right.
And it's probably the preeminent tech college in the world, if not certainly America.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're accessing talent in a place where it's like, well, wait a minute, let's start looking in here instead of looking out to
Right.
China, to India,
Well,
it's sort of like outsourcing, insourcing, if that makes
yeah.
sense.
Oh, and well, actually, another university in your state was where my daughter went, Carnegie Mellon.
Yep.
MIT
We
and
hire
Carnegie are 1 and 2 in technology in the country.
Yeah, we hire CMU grads all the time.
Really? Well,
Yeah, we have two. They're right down the road from us. It's like an
I
hour and a half.
I happen to know one very well. If you're looking, she's one, and her boyfriend is getting his her fiance now is getting his PhD in theoretical computer science there.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, they also have the ETC Entertainment Technology Center, so they have quite a large video game program.
Yeah.
I think it's like a maybe Disney. Somebody had their. Don't quote me on that. Somebody. They have quite a large industrial partnership as well,
Yes.
so they have like a well-known game program. And so, the folks we get are consistently super high quality. Cleveland Institute of Art
Mhm.
is really good, also an hour and a half away. Yeah, and then we have Penn State right here. So we source
Right.
from Penn State's Erie campus, which is a huge engineering school.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite frequently.
Yeah. Very good. So, and there's some pretty good schools down in Philadelphia too, I hear.
Yeah. Drexel's big in our area.
Villanova.
Yeah, Villanova and Penn, obviously, but they're
And
different skill sets. But yeah.
cool. So, um, can you tell us about your company, WhiteThorn Games? What types of games you produce? Who's your target audience? Things like
Yeah.
that.
Sure. Yeah, we take a bit of a contrarian approach. So publishers are there's sort of three tiers of where money goes when you purchase a game. So ignoring retail for a minute. Obviously, if there's retail, the retail person has a small markup as well. But ignoring retail, if you just purchase it on your console or purchase it on the internet or whatever, there's three people that take money. There's what we call platform, publisher, developer. The platform is Nintendo or Microsoft or wherever you decided, the outlet where you decided to purchase it is the platform and where you
Mhm.
intend to play it. So on PC, this could be Steam, it could be Epic, it could whatever, and then obviously your actual mainline consoles. They will take a cut of that purchase. Then next down the line is the publisher. This is us. These are the people that prepared those store pages, marketed it, probably paid for the ads you saw, developed the trailers, developed the marketing materials. They're the reason you know the game exists, and they're the reason it's formatted and ready to be played on your whatever system.
Mhm.
And then the last one down the line, and these are the folks who keep in fair deals and good deals. These are the people who keep the bulk of the purchase price. Um, there's the developer themselves. So that developer is the person that actually built this game. So the art, the programming, the experiences, the writing, music, all that is the developer. So we're just one little piece of kind of where every game purchase goes. And there are quite a few of us, probably at least 20, 25 really good, well-known, what you might call independent publishers. So think of us like, 100 to 200 million and under in revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So we're smaller comparatively. And then there's your big boy publishers that you've heard of that are publicly traded: Activision, Blizzard, Electronic Arts,
Mm-hmm.
all publishers. Now, sometimes they own first party development houses. So if a publisher gets substantially big enough that they have enough, free liquid capital available, they can say, hey, wait a minute, if we develop something and we own the company that develops it, we keep 100% of that revenue. We don't have to give it to a developer. So sometimes a publisher will either purchase or wholly subsidiarize a company, and then they're both developer and publisher in kind of an odd way. So if you think
Mm-hmm.
about PlayStation, that's like Sony Santa Monica Studio. That is a studio owned by Sony, published by Sony on PlayStation. So it's kind of entirely, um, inside work. Um, but in any case, we're always one of those, the middle entity in those purchases. And so every publisher, just like every record label, every book publisher, tends to focus on a particular genre, brand, type, whatever. We chose to work on what we've jokingly called casual core. So it's there's this silly title called like hardcore in gaming, which is goofy. It's Call of Duty, shooters, competitive stuff that you've heard of.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's casual, which is kind of a derisive term that refers to people who basically play clicker games on their phone. And so we sort of sit somewhere in the middle. We look for folks who are like adults with hobbies that are not necessarily just games. Most of our stuff is what you'd call like wholesome, approachable, bite-sized experiences. Things like these are not our games, but things like these, Animal Crossing that just came out from Nintendo would be something we'd be super interested in. Um, those kinds of experiences that require you to only play 30 minutes to 2 hours at a time, don't require an incredible time investment, aren't high octane, high stress, and don't require finger karate or anything like that. So that's our demographic. They're usually working adults. It swings a little more female than the core
Mm-hmm.
demographic of the games industry. A few reasons. One, that audience has not really been addressed by a
True.
specific label just yet. So aiming for an underserved audience is two things are good there. One, it means these folks aren't saturated on ad spend, on purchase. They have money left to spend on games.
Mm-hmm.
It also means that you make and create a more diverse games industry with more customers in there. So we're not, both for like a social capital, social good diversity reasons, but also for diversity of content. So when we have more than just that sort of gamer, and I'm making air quotes for the audio folks, but more than that like 14 to 26-year-old white male kind of that you kind of think of, when the audience becomes more diverse, then the content we create becomes more diverse, which means creatives are more attracted to the industry. It's just a healthier industry for
Mm-hmm.
everybody. So that's one, we're able to do that because we're a little smaller. If you're an enormous publicly traded company, you do have to be somewhat risk avoidant to make sure you're
Right.
providing reasonable return and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're smaller, when you're a startup, you can be frisky, and that's one of the angles we took. Been reasonably successful so far. Continue to grow. Seed round was successful. We're staying alive during a kind of a black swan event right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Interesting. So, do you do publish and develop, or just publish?
Yeah, we don't have enough money to have an in-house development studio just yet. That's quite an expensive endeavor. We are working on some titles internally, just kind of prototypey slowly, but there's nothing we've put out that we've developed yet. So the core business line is absolutely publishing other people's titles.
Okay. So, but I assume you have there are developers, around the world that know of you, and they give things to you to be published. Correct?
Yeah. We so there'll be a talk. Sorry, the conferences are all going online right now, so they're hard to keep track
Mm.
of. Maybe I think it's PAX. It's a talk coming up that we provided some data for on pitching. So one of the things we receive all the time are pitches for games, just like a startup investor or a VC, an angel investor, economic development group, whatever, would receive pitches from startups. So we get ones from games because oftentimes we also act as the funding agent for games. So we'll
Mm.
say, here's the $250,000, whatever you need to complete your game on milestone payments, and then we'll recuperate that from their sales at the end.
Mm.
You get the idea. So we sometimes also act as a funding entity for games as well. Usually smaller amounts, nothing in the millions or whatever.
Yeah.
But other publishers are bigger and do fund at that level. We're not there.
Mm.
But in any case, no, we receive like 100 plus a year easily.
Oh wow.
Now, many of those immediately are sort of like fast failures where it's like this doesn't fit our brand, or and we're all quite collegial, so we'll be in a like other publisher scouts will be in a Slack together, and we'll kind of just pass leads around that don't fit our brand or whatnot.
Hmm.
So there's not like a lot of throat cutting going on or anything.
Interesting. Yeah, it
But
seems like
like
a
it's
big enough industry that there's enough to go around.
well, it's sort of friendly competition, right? We all want good games to come out. It's just because this is not an industry you get into by and large to be brutal, competitive, backstabby, throat cutting. I
Mm.
mean, every one of us just grew up being goofballs and playing video games, so it's something we got into to be quite leisurely and to be quite collegial, and so there's not a lot of vitriol and negativity like you might see in sort of harsher kind of sales environments.
Hmm.
I did like corporate wireless sales for a while, like the
Mm.
hey, giant hospital, every one of your cell phones should be on Sprint kind of thing. And
Mm.
when you saw ATT coming, you were sort of like, I'm gonna slash that guy's tires. Like it was a little more vicious. I mean, it wasn't. The company I worked for was neither Sprint nor ATT, to be clear. But regardless, as an example, you can
Yes.
understand how that can be a little more vicious because it's zero sum. If ATT gets it, Sprint doesn't, and vice
Right.
versa. Whereas it's really not that way with games. If we get
Hmm.
a brutal, pulpy, bloody shooter, that's not a game we'd ever publish, but it might be a great game that people would love to buy. So we'll happily hand it to a competitor that works on brutal, pulpy shooters because
Yeah.
it's not like a zero sum thing. Like it's not,
Yeah.
well, if we don't get it, no one will kind of thing.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, that
yeah.
makes sense. Interesting. So, how did you incorporate the idea of remote at your company? Did you do it from day one, or was it more recent?
Well, certainly recently we've absolutely had to,
Right.
but no, I mean right from the beginning we had a remote worker or two, like literally right off the bat. Our sort of now engineering director, CTO, I suppose, was working at a Cleveland clinic,
Hmm.
with a hospital, in their engineering department, managing things like patient data, machine maintenance,
Hmm.
database work, and was someone I trusted from when I was living back here, with immense technical expertise. And I sort of said, this is the thing I'm doing. We're probably not going to have an office for like a year because the first year is just getting registered to be on all of these consoles and doing all of that prep work.
Hmm.
So, I mean, you happy to just work on this from wherever you are? And I mean, this was just day one. I think startups and remote work kind of go together like peanut
Yeah.
butter and jam in a lot of ways
Hmm.
because ultimately you're looking for the most qualified person or persons to start that company with you, not the most local person or persons, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, the internet makes that simple, especially for tech. I mean, obviously, if you and
Right.
I are going to go start like a restaurant or something, that's a very different conversation. But I mean, in tech, yeah, it works naturally.
Hmm. Yeah, but so you started that way, and do you actually have an office where people were
Yeah,
coming to,
yeah,
or?
we do. Yeah, we do have a physical office. So a few reasons for that. One, well, first of all, we sell merchandise, so we got to put it somewhere, like physical merchandise. Two, there are certain things where collaboration in place is really super helpful. There's this thing in programming we jokingly call like the rubber duck effect, which is just the very act of explaining your programming to another person often causes you to solve a problem. And so
Mhm.
having people physically around can be quite helpful. There's sort of this sounds really trendy and hipstery, but there's sort of what you might call creative collisions where people are working on two things that are not necessarily related, but they're in proximity to one another and they talk through it and sometimes come up with something that's a little better than the sum of the parts. So those are things we're having a little bit of trouble replicating in the remote space. Because it's just not feasible to get everybody on a synchronous 9-hour call every day. Like
Right.
what the hell?
Right.
And you'd never do that. And that's not how remote work is or should be.
Right.
But there are certain benefits in working creatively together in a closed space for a period of time that I'm not sure we would ever be able to replicate nicely. When this ends, this mandatory work from home, we will probably have a work from home day or two a week every week for everybody, just because we've learned to do it so effectively that there'd be no sane reason not to. Additionally, there's certain security reasons why we have to have a physical location, things like access to development hardware for the different major consoles. They have security and confidentiality concerns surrounding their hardware, which is understandable. So they need to have somewhere to physically ship stuff, to have it locked
Mm.
down, to have security systems guarding it, to have static IP addresses, that kind of thing. So there
Mhm.
is some need for a physical space still. I don't think we'll be ever completely aphysical. The other thing is that since we are very much a brand, sometimes on the cap table, not the cap table, excuse me, sometimes on the asset, like the balance sheet, um, it's hard to put a finger on how much something is like worth when it's a brand in a quantifiable way. So, Spider-Man, we know that's worth a lot, but it's really hard to like melt it down and sell it. Like it doesn't work that way. So to some degree, having, $1 million collateralizable asset like an office building
Mhm.
is something on the balance sheet that's helpful in valuation and in keeping it there. So that's something that is hard to obviate.
Yeah.
Without an office, you lack a really substantial piece of your balance sheet's asset cap. So that's a
Mhm.
tricky one to get by.
Yes. Well, and since we're talking about the pandemic, I mean, we were all forced to go remote in mid-March, and you just talked about you had things at your office that had to be there. How did you get around that roadblock or challenge?
We're like VPNing to our empty ass office.
Really?
Right? Yeah, at the moment. So for certain things that we have to access in the office, like physical and I'm trying to tiptoe around the non-disclosure agreement here. There's certain things that I can't really
Mm.
speak to, but we have certain things in the office where we literally have iPads with their cameras pointed at things that we like VPN into and look at
Oh,
in order to. So there's been some hacky workarounds to make some of it work, but by and large, it's just remote into the system and
right. But those are
use.
some unique challenges that the average industry didn't have.
Yeah, I mean, suppose you were a brewery and your production line was more or less completely automated. Um, but you get on smartphone alerts, whatever, and you see on your monitoring system, hey, line C is busted and is not putting out beer. What's
Hmm.
happening? Normal days, you just send a text. Like you'd text your whoever and you'd be like, hey, line C's busted, get in there. But now it's kind of like, well, I guess I got to put a camera on a Roomba or something because I can't go in there. I'm violating a government order. So, and so
Yeah.
it just becomes this like, so we've had to kind of work around that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But hey, you're still in business and still doing all right. So
Oh yeah, I mean, games are one of those things that Q2 games industry size report came out like 3 days ago. I mean, it saw another surging quarter. I mean, people are stuck in their houses,
right.
so
Yeah, I would think your business is doing well.
we're doing fine. We're doing just fine. And us as an industry are doing tremendously.
Right.
Our struggles are around trying to keep our verticals balanced because, again, we did a lot of software contracting sales that are really tricky right now.
Mm.
But no, I mean it's been okay.
Yeah.
So as a result, we haven't applied for much of the government aid because it's hard to justify. Oh yeah, we went up 200% year over year. Please give us relief money. Like, of course we're not going to apply for that.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's been an interesting 6 months, however long
Well,
it's been. I don't know. I'm losing track of time.
seems like
I
it. Well,
haven't had a
five now.
haircut.
Happy five.
I don't know. God, I haven't had hair this long since I was a teenager.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't had hair that long either. I'm losing some, so I'm going the other way. Although I did get one haircut since the stay in place.
I haven't touched it. It's
Yeah.
just I'm gonna end up looking like a I don't know mountain man here pretty
Hmm.
soon.
Yeah, you're back to your college days, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So to finish with, there's companies like Gaper that help develop, build, and scale products, and we do it especially for startups. How important do you think that will be going forward for companies like yourself? Because you have very unique programming needs, and you need people in a hurry. How important do you think these types of industries will be?
Yeah, I mean, hard to speak to, but I will suggest that I think if you have a vertical that relates directly to providing, developer talent and a remote capacity at speed,
Mhm.
that's probably going to be valuable going forward. I mean, the world, when it recovers from this, will realize that this is an option and not a demand. There's going to be not so much at startups, I don't think, but at especially large to mid-sized companies,
Mhm.
there's going to be committees put together and whatnot to sit down and be like, all right, what went wrong in the pandemic? But what can we take from it to go forward with that, like what health and safety things? How can we reduce employee time out on cold and flu season by implementing some of the things that we learned in our social distancing, in our hygiene during the pandemic.
Mm.
Certainly, we don't need everybody to be gas masking and Lysol everything like we are now, but maybe we learned that, hey, these dividers aren't a terrible idea. Hey, maybe having fewer people sit physically proximal in the kitchen isn't a bad idea, like whatever it might be.
Right.
But I think one of those things is going to be, hey, suddenly we pivoted to 100% mandatory remote. How did that affect the business? Where do we like save money?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're a major company, big, hundreds, thousands of employees in a physical space, you're learning right now that your physical space and the cost of the physical plant is quite high, and maybe it doesn't need to be that high.
Right.
And so if I'm a CFO trying to find, cost savings, that's an area where I'd be looking immediately is like, well, wait a minute, there's 5,000 desks out there, and we're paying for, lunch and security and electricity and internet and physical equipment and office
Mm-hmm.
space, which can often be tremendously expensive, especially in, Bay Area or coastal companies. Yeah, I mean, we're going to be revisiting this for a while. I mean, this is like, this is a 9/11, to put it out there, that
Mm-hmm.
will fundamentally change certain things about how we operate everything.
Right.
I mean, pre and post 9/11 was the difference between me being a little kid getting a picture sitting on the like controls of a 747 with,
Mm-hmm.
in the sky, and, an 8.5-inch thick solid steel bulletproof door between me
Right.
and the pilot, right?
Yeah.
Like complete dramatic change in everything and permanent, and something
Mm-hmm.
that is never going to go away,
Right.
because forever it'll be 2111, and someone will be like, oh, you remember 2001? Like it's never going to change.
Right.
So I think some things are going to stick after this. I don't think it'll necessarily again be quite the lockdown level we're looking at now, but I think this is definitely like an inflection point in how we do business across the spectrum. I mean, I think a lot of people right now are evaluating, well, wait a minute, do I need to pay all that money for daycare, or can I just work from home? And,
Right.
like we're being forced to come to task with that. Like, I mean, I have a toddler in the other room running around being a psychopath, and my wife is off for the summer. She's a teacher, so she's literally our daycare right now. But I mean, her district, I mean, she just got work from home approval, so she'll be home all year. I'll be home all year. Like, this is going to change a lot about how our life looks in a
Mm-hmm.
fundamental way. Certain things we're no longer paying for. It's like, what do I need like security system and home monitoring for if I'm home 7 days a week? What do
Right.
I need to pay a landscaper for if I'm home 7 days a week? I'll just mow the damn lawn.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I paying $400 a week for daycare if I'm here all the time?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're reevaluating a lot of things. And so I think, yeah, I mean, providing developers without us having to physically get out there and do all of the messy stuff. I mean, that's a step beyond just like a recruitment agency, right? Because you're not putting
Yes.
bodies in seats. Yeah, and I think, I mean, it makes sense. It's valuable.
Right.
For us, our main investors in economic development group, so we try our best to remain local,
Mm-hmm.
for good reason. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not, and we don't see the benefit like a New York startup does of hiring in Middle America at
Mm-hmm.
all, because we're in Middle America. So for us, sourcing someone from another Middle America city just doesn't make a whole lot of sense because they're here.
You're there.
Yeah, exactly that. But if you are, like a Y Combinator company that plops out and suddenly has this massive venture raise, and you're looking for talent, I mean, there's a huge, interesting, diverse, talented country in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
that, I mean, needs to be hooked up with these kinds of jobs. It's tremendous. I mean, it's wealth redistribution. It has every good, extremely liberal leaning thing I believe in,
Mm-hmm.
is helped by this kind of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I do talk to, and we do hire, people from parts of the U.S. that are less expensive. But the
Yeah.
difference between, a comp sci grad from one of these schools we mentioned and a comp sci grad in Erie or in Salt Lake City or Alabama, huge difference in salary. And, I don't really know that there's that big of a difference in talent.
I want to be, so I worked in education for a long time. And I mean, my PhD is in education. So education is a bit of a J curve, in price, not in quality. So let me be clear with what I mean by that. If your goal is like, I want to get a healthy BMI and a six pack, there's a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot of ways you can do that, right? Like you can do that by literally eating less and doing more, which is the easiest way to do it,
Mhm.
but not really that easy, to be clear. It's, you got to stick to it. But you can also, pay for a gym membership, which will increase your likelihood a little bit. You can pay a tremendous amount of money for a personal trainer, which will increase it a little bit.
More.
But ultimately, that first 90% is you eating less and doing more.
Yes.
And so, to be clear, a brand new graduate from, and we've worked with both at PlayStation. We had 2 interns, one from Harvard, one from out at San Diego State. And I mean, these are 2 fundamentally different schools. San Diego State and Harvard, I mean, on paper, look very, very different. But I mean, they both needed the same training, right? Like they both
Right.
had the same fundamental skills. It's like, yeah, okay, you're both, these were engineers. You're both perfectly talented at what you're doing, but we still, because you're brand new out of college, regardless of if that's MIT, Harvard, CMU, whatever, you still come out, nascent. Like you have the
Mm.
skills, you just, sometimes it's things just like using Git appropriately and
Right.
like like commit message etiquette and things that are just workforce things.
Mhm.
The games industry is pretty loud and clear about, and I would be really loud and clear about, we actually don't even care if you have a degree. The thing we see when we hire people is usually their portfolio. So
Mm.
we act a little more like entertainment industry because we are, where I don't care if you went to a really, really high quality acting school. I'm more likely as a scout to just discover you while you're being a barista at a bar somewhere in
Mm.
Nebraska. Like
Mhm.
I mean, this for us, and this may differ if you're hiring for, like missile guidance systems at Lockheed Martin or
Right.
something. But for us, product way outpaces pedigree,
Mhm.
to be blunt.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
So like by 1,000%. So we honestly, I mean, we've hired people with high school diplomas that
Mm.
are extremely, extremely talented and that do great and make a great salary here and do great jobs. So
Mhm.
it's, again, product and pedigree. We have that conversation a lot. And I mean, AAA is having a harder time. So when I say this, I mean, Activision, PlayStation, AAA.
Mhm.
We're having a harder time with it because, I mean, we still are a corporate culture and things like that, and we're embedded in a way of thinking that is uh, older.
Mhm.
But indies, smaller companies like us, we're completely free of any of that. So I mean, if you can do the job, that's all we really care about. Obviously, if this is a heart surgeon, a pilot, a
Right.
etc., there are areas where that is not the case, and
Correct.
you're right. But we make video games. When things go poorly here, the worst we get is nasty comments on Steam. We don't,
Mhm.
no planes don't drop out of the sky, bridges don't collapse, people don't have heart attacks. Um,
Right.
so it's been a weird, and not to get political, but it's been a weird few years too to evaluate like the concept of qualifications and intelligence, and in the
Mhm.
last little while, because this has been an ugly, ugly few years for that conversation, to be
Mhm.
honest.
Yeah. Yes. Well, Matt, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been quite interesting. You have some great insights, and I learned a lot about the gaming industry today.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So I hope you have a great day.
Yeah, of course, you too. Yeah, take care. Thank you so much.
All right. Goodbye.